But nobody's left, they're all still
No,
here.
I mean, I have to say, I'm really impressed. I did not expect to see this at 10:30 this morning. Right, a little bit about my story, because Adrian set a very good target there, sort of like, how do we get the audience in, apart from the fact you want to hear what I'm going to say. Right, so I'm a hop farmer's son. I did a BSc in Rural Environment Studies at White College, a PhD in Environmental Science with Tim O'Riordan in Norwich. I went to Herts County Council, where I was the landscape officer for 4 years. That's when I joined the Landscape Institute as landscape manager. And in 1993, I thought, Hertfordshire's not big enough. I want to get involved in landscape on a bigger scale, so I joined the National Farmers Union. I didn't let them know I was a landscape architect or landscape manager at the time. And for some damn fool reason, they made me director of policy 3 years ago. So I now manage the NFU's policy directorate. Anything the NFU thinks about stuff, I've got people that deal with it. I've got the Brussels office, when it was a good thing to have a Brussels office. Now we're sort of wondering about developing a London office. And I've got offices in Stoneleigh, where our headquarters is, which covers all environmental cross-cutting issues, food chain and all the commodity areas. So that's a bit about NFU, myself and my role. The fact that's interesting, I think, is that for the first time, we do a business confidence survey of farmers every 6 months. And for the first 6 months after Brexit, the pattern followed the same pattern as it has for many years, which is that farmers are always more confident in the future than they are of the present. Farmers always think it's going to be better. For the first time in my experience for 10 years, farmers are now less confident about the future than they are about the present. And I think that just sort of is an indication of where certainty lies, and there is uncertainty in the future. And farming confidence is important, just like any business confidence, because it's what people are thinking, what they're doing, and what they're going to be investing in. Right then, I'll go and skip through these slides fairly quickly because we've covered a number of the points already. First, a little bit about farming's footprint. Look, the thing I need to leave with you, and the point I make to many, both in the farming community and politicians, who are the people I normally deal with, is that farming matters. It might be quite small in terms of the economy, but it's very big in terms of its landscape area and its impact. And it's not just about the environment. You'd think, listening to Michael Gove, the only thing he's worried about is the environment. Actually, farmers produce food, and most people actually eat food rather than flowers. So, it's really important that we remember that farming's important, that food's on the agenda, and that we want to get that point across. Farming is easily overlooked, but any of those who've got any history in farming will know that when we become dissociated from society, when society becomes dissociated where its food comes from, uninterested in the landscape, then we're in a pretty bad place. And so it's really, really vital that we make the case as farmers about why it matters and why people are going to be concerned. And the last point I wanted to make on this slide is that Adrian did a very interesting story about how how environment and countryside conservation has evolved over the period. My narrative is, in the time that I've worked with the NFU for 25 years, farming has come out, environment has come from the field corners into the field centre. Now you cannot deliver a sustainable environmentally friendly farming system unless you're concerned about what happens in the field as well as what happens on the edge of the field. It matters all of the time of the year, not just in the winter time when you're not farming. And it matters everywhere as well, because the other seminal piece of work that from my point of view is Common Land. Clifford and King, Angela, I think it was Angela Clifford, or was Angela King? Anyway, Clifford and King, Common Land, which just said that every bit of the countryside is important. It's not just about national parks and AONBs. Right, when you're thinking about this journey that we're on in the National Farmers Union, this is what we are, our sort of our mission statement at the present moment. Our business, what I am trying to achieve on behalf of farmers, is to stand up for active, sustainable, profitable and progressive farm businesses. being absolutely at the heart of what the market needs and what society needs from farming. That we're fairly rewarded for all of the goods we provide, not just food, but environmental provision as well. And that farming is seen as central to our UK food system. It's so easy to see farming, and one of our Achilles' heels has been seeing farming as just a few people in the countryside kicking up a fuss when we have an animal disease. In actual fact, farming is part of the UK food chain, which is the largest manufacturing sector in the country. It employs 3.6 billion people. So it is an important part, and we produce 61% of the nation's food needs from the UK farming. So I was interested to see in the past it was 30% before the war. It's changed a lot. The concern I have is that 60% has declined from around about 80% in the mid-1980s. Brexit. We've moved from a situation in 1947 through 73 and joining the European, or the EEC at that stage, to 2019 when we'll be leaving the European Union. It's an existential crisis for farming. The Common Agricultural Policy in Europe has shaped how farmers think and what they do, and the businesses that they have developed as a result of that. And the concern I have about it is that just as there was no plan for Brexit and no agreement about what Brexit looked like, there's no plan for farming either within that Brexit. Basically, Brexit was like an a la carte menu. You could choose pretty much whatever you wanted from what politicians were offering us, whether it's free trade or Little Britain and a fortress nation. Now, in that context, from our point of view in the policy team, we have spent we'd spent time before trying to make sure that the choice was informed, and then when the country made the decision, we have spent the last 18 months developing a new agricultural policy. And I'll come back to talk about it. It's basically around three cornerstones of productivity, environment and volatility. But alongside domestic agriculture policy, it is vital also that we address trade. And I think, Merrick, one or two of you have said already, the nature of the trade relationship that the UK has with Europe and other countries is absolutely fundamental to the shape of the countryside that we have. And anybody who overlooks it and thinks that they can get an agri-environment scheme to get out of it is in cloud cuckoo land. Not only trade, but labour and regulatory flaw as well. So we've got, if you want to look, it's all open sourced information on NFU online. But I think it does provide a recipe card for what we think could produce that sustainable, productive and progressive farm businesses in the future. Three pictures here. The first thing I wanted to mention was the parts of the UK, and I think a colleague at the back mentioned about Wales. I have done more work with other parts of the UK in the last couple of years than I did for probably the last 10 years. UK farming unions are working together. We work together in Europe, but now we're working together in London. It's vital that we do, because in actual fact we've got the potential for moving from a situation where we have a common agricultural policy across the whole of the European Union to an uncommon agricultural policy in 4 parts of the United Kingdom, with all of the problems that has. And there's about 575 businesses, farm businesses, that span the borders of England, Wales, and England and Scotland, and also in Ulster. And it makes no sense at all to come out of the single market and then actually come out of a single UK market as well. So we're working really hard to make sure there is some common agreement. Not easy, I have to say, because some of my colleagues think they're better off with the Scottish Government than they are with the Westminster Government, for a whole range of different reasons. This is just to capture the point about world trade. Trade is really, really difficult. The emphasis, if you're a Liam Fox in this world, the trade goes this way, outwards. It never seems to come back inwards again. Trade is two-way. Nobody is going to agree to a trade agreement unless it's two-way. So what's the standard of the food that comes back into the UK? That is critical. I'm also concerned about the cost, but let's stick to standards to start with. And the decisions are all going to be made here in Westminster, and I want to make sure that when they make decisions, they do it in an informed way. Now, I wanted to make there's a series of clips out of the website here now. The point I want to make with this set is that when we're going to Brexit, farmers, there is no single start place for farming. Every farmer and every sector starts at a very different starting place. And if you want to read the really interesting stuff in the Health and Harmony website consultation, actually look at the evidence compendium, which apart from some really crap cartoons, has got some really interesting data in it. So go past the irritating cartoons and get into the stuff. So a few of those, or a couple which I found interesting. This is the point about farmers start in different places. This is looking at farm business income over the last 10 years, all types of farm businesses. But what you see is that farm business income is hugely variable. It's also comprised of 4 different types of things. The blue column at the bottom here is actually your agriculture, your food production income. The orange bit here is agri-environment schemes. The green bit is diversification, and the purple bit is your basic payment scheme. And for what that tells you is, apart from the fact that farms currently are earning less than they used to in the mid-2000s, that the basic payment scheme, this purple column, which is the bit which Michael Gove saying they're going to cut away, is a very significant determinant of farm income. That is an economic reality which people shouldn't forget. And also, the economic reality is that in the last 2 years, if it was food production people were depending on alone, they wouldn't have made any money at all on whole. But that's average farms, and not everybody is in that situation. And the other one I wanted to just show you is the extremities of where farm business sectors come from. And this chart, again, it's in that compendium of economic analysis. And what this shows you is this chart here is all farms: poultry, dairy, LFA livestock grazing, and lowland livestock grazing. If there's one sector and one part of farming which is most economically threatened by Brexit, it's the lowland livestock grazing system. The problem with lowland livestock, these are beef and sheep farmers in the lowlands. These guys are not in sufficiently attractive areas to be able to get the potential benefit of being a national park, an ESA. These guys, LFA grazing farmers, they do fairly well out of agri-environment schemes, and thinking about it, they'll probably do all right in the future because the public will want them to be all right. But these guys here in the lowlands are the unforgotten, potentially the forgotten bit, which is 45% of the country is permanent grassland. That's where all your downland grazing is. So that's an important area. The other point I wanted to make here is that when you compare poultry farms here and dairy farms, those two sectors, over 40% of those two sectors would earn over 50,000 a year in terms of farm income. You look at the lowland livestock grazing and the upland livestock grazing, between 11 and 8% earn a similar quantity of money. Whereas you're down at the same sort of level here, about 40% of these guys in the grazing sector earn less than £10,000 a year, and a substantial minority, a fifth of the lowland livestock grazers make no money at all in 2014-15 and 2016-17. All of that information is in the compendium of evidence alongside the Health and Harmony survey, so it's not stuff I'm making up, but that is the real economic reality of farming at this moment. And if we're going to deliver environmental gains, these are the people, and particularly in the livestock side, these are the farms that have got to be able to deliver that on a wide scale, or choose a rewilding option, a different option. I say very often to farming audience, Brexit changes everything and nothing. And by that I mean, yes, it does change the policy context. It changes who we talk to. It does mean that government ministers can't sit behind Brussels and go, it wasn't us, it was them over there, which they do an awful lot. Well, they're not able to do that anymore, but it doesn't address some of these things, which is improving our environmental performance, addressing productivity challenge, by which I mean, yes, we have improved productivity. I think Simon mentioned that this morning. We have improved our productivity, but not as fast as other parts of Europe and other parts of the world have. So we're becoming less competitive, which is why we're feeding less of the nation. We haven't got fair returns from the marketplace. We get a very small proportion of the profit in the final shop price. It doesn't tell us how we're going to secure our UK borders against pests and diseases, and it certainly doesn't isolate us from climate change. I am worried, and you can see it really clearly in the introduction to the Health and Harmony survey, consultation rather. The impressions given is that leave the CAP and everything is honey and roses. It is not the case. There are many things that have to be sorted out, and had to be sorted out before Brexit happened, and certainly need to be happened after. And the great thing is actually, I know exactly where those ministers are now. They're going to be in London, they've got to sort it out, and they can't hide behind anybody. Right then, these points, I just wanted to make that, that I think you've seen the slide already. I say I've got point one: false premise, CAP bad, UK DAP good. The other thing to say about this is Health and Harmony doesn't set a plan. It sets out a set of principles, but it is a green paper and it doesn't have a plan. And it's for us to talk about the plan, and that's why Merrick's absolutely important, absolutely right. It's really important that we all contribute towards that, including farmers. And now's the time to shape the future. It does ask some of the right questions, moving away from common agricultural policy to what? It talks about public money for public goods. Absolutely agree, we need to have that discussion. It does talk about risk management, supply chain, and a new framework for UK policies. The trouble is it doesn't actually provide any of the answers to any of these questions. It just answers a whole range of questions. And as you rightly say as well, Merrick, some of the stuff that's really difficult in there, especially when you enter the online citizens and space consultation, it forces you to try and prioritise between 8 or 10 different environmental options, which, well, the NFU is not going to fill that in. Because there's no way that I can define every one of those are important, depending on the geographic context. And it's about time that we had an honest discussion about that type of approach. Apart from that, it does ask the right questions. And when the NFU was setting out our stall about what we thought were the type of things that need to be talked about, we certainly talked about supply chain, we certainly talked about risk management, we certainly talked about new agricultural policy, we certainly talked about having to have a common UK framework, because we accepted that perhaps we might be leaving the European Union, but we certainly weren't going to be leaving the UK rather. And the environmental debate is obviously going to be critical too. So it asks the right questions, but it doesn't go into the right sort of level of detail. The other thing that's interesting there is Michael Gove, and the consultation paper as well, talks about public money for public goods. If you're a classical economist, very few of these things that they talk about are actually public goods. They absolutely agree they are things that the public would expect and have a view on, but they're not public goods in the strict economic sense of the word. But then it's driven by politics, and politicians are fast and loose with such concepts as public goods. In that sense, there's all to play for. I wanted just to pick out some of the timescale, because one of the concerns we have within farming is just how quickly this is all going to happen. And I think there's quite a big debate about that. Now, this is the timescale that Michael Gove set out at the Oxford Farming Conference, and it's in the consultation as well, at the Oxford Farming Conference January 2018. Basically saying that for 2019, everything, well, while we leave in March, the 29 year we're pretty much exactly as we currently have it, so there's no change there. Depending on how negotiations go with the European community, European Union rather, it could be 2020 is a similar sort of state, but there will be at some stage either beginning at the end of 2020 or sometime later in 2021, an implementation phase or a transition agreement, depending on which side of the channel you are. It means the same thing. It's basically putting into play some of the rule changes and the flexibilities that the UK gets as a consequence of leaving the European Union. And we have a guarantee for the £3.2 billion that goes into agriculture in Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 across the UK. We've got a guarantee that as long as the Parliament's in place, that will be spent, and that's a manifesto commitment. So we kind of know there's money available up to that stage, and up to this stage, around about 2019, 2020, things won't change a lot. But there'll be a period of change here, and then there'll be a large period of change later on in 2023, 2024. The problem for farmers is, they'll be going and putting, if you're into beef farming, you'll be putting your cattle to the bull this year and be marketing your produce in this year. If you're planting long-term permanent crops, you could be planting them here and actually harvesting them in here. In other words, you're going to be investing in things which actually you don't know whether you're going to have a market for. So there's real concerns about there. And at the same time, that's just a policy transition. At the same time, at some stage here, we're going to get a new trade agreement with the European Union. At some stage later on, Donald Trump and Theresa May will come up with a new, God help us, trade agreement. And then New Zealand will get, because clearly we want to go and sell an awful lot of insurance products to the New Zealanders. Why? I don't know. So there's an awful lot going to happen. Basically what I'm saying is, from a policy point of view, I want to play it as long as possible, because I really don't know what the economic situation I'm going to find my members in at this stage. And there's a real danger that we'll be throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And with that in mind, I thought it was quite interesting in the evidence compendium that actually some bright spark in the economics team in DEFRA has drawn some lines on a chart, which shows that you could actually have a 5-year transition, a 7-year transition, or a 10-year transition with different phasings. Now, this doesn't include the Treasury transition, which basically just goes like that. Or possibly like that if they're feeling good. There is very, very different transition timelines, and while we have a fair amount of clarity that Michael Gove would like to cap payments, and in England that is, actually I should say all of this is England, not Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. They're working to a different game plan, but in England they're looking at capping potentially, or a modulation payment where everybody contributes in 1 year, in that first year. But that apart from the first £150 million, there are no plans in the consultation set out which show what it would look like in the future. And potentially there could be 5, 7 or 10 years. Now, from our point of view, because of the uncertainties, we're talking about as long a transition as possible, and not necessarily straight line either. You might take some money out to start with to try out some different approaches, but hold the money in farming until you know what you're actually transitioning to, what type of economic and regulatory environment that you're looking for. So there's that discussion going on, which I think is quite an interesting one, and one which I think you should all be aware of, which is why I brought it up. What is DEFRA? Because that's the other point. Of course, they're taking money off. They're proposing to take money away from BPS, but what they're going to spend it on at the present moment, the suggestion is trialling animal welfare measures, investing in agricultural productivity, and trialling a new agri-environment scheme, with the premise that that is where the bulk of funding is going to be going in the future. Which, those are three things that could go right, that could be tried out. Certainly one of the points we've been made very strongly to them in DEFRA is, do not go and launch a big blockbuster scheme until you've actually tried it out first. It's something that I think the Countryside Commission in the past has certainly shown, that try it out first, see how people react, test it, learn the lessons, and then roll it out properly. Every experience we've had with computers and government has meant that it's at least 3 or 4 years before you actually sort out the mess that's been created. I thought you'd be interested. This again comes out of the consultation proposals there, that the lion's share of funding is likely to go into paying for environmental goods. There's some interesting elements within this chart which aren't talked about. This line here between the regulatory baseline and the environmental scheme, that's what I call the line of argument, because that'll be the big debate. There'll be questions about these two schemes here, about income forgone, and on what basis farms are rewarded. That discussion has already been had today. There'll be a question around this whole lot here. Experience shows that the politicians, when they come to find out how much this costs to deliver, start arguing about that and want to cut back on the cost of delivery. So the cost of delivery are going to be important, because the cost of delivering an environmental scheme is a lot more than the cost of delivering a basic payment scheme, because it is more complex, which therefore says, how simple do you make this and how complex do you make that? Those are points that have already been made. Any other points I want to make on that? Oh yeah, and the other thing I want to make on here is that there's a bit of a risk around this, is that if you're a landowner, you stand to make quite a lot of money out of this, because payments are attached to land. What about agricultural tenants? And agricultural tenants very often find themselves having to deliver an environmental scheme without actually being paid for it, because it's the landowner that's taking the money through the rental value. So we're very keen in NFU, because we represent all farmers, all sectors and all types of farm, to ensure that there are elements of the environmental scheme which are actually available on an annual basis. And actually annual environmental commitments that could well be picked up every year are an important part of that range of different environmental rewards that farming should be able to attract in. So don't dismiss annual environmental commitments in a bid simply to look at the exciting stuff of downland recreation or salt marsh management. We've got to have stuff that every farmer, wherever they farm, can actually participate in terms of environmental activity. NFU's initial reaction, well, what we have are sort of 3 cornerstones for agricultural policy around these themes of environment, volatility and productivity. And I should just say what we mean by that. Environment hopefully stands for itself. You understand what that means. That's the public goods argument. And so there is clearly a substantial part of agricultural payments that should be about environmental reward. But we are also saying that there is farmers operate in a very uncertain environment, and there needs to be policy measures out there which help farmers manage their economic and their commodity regimes in which they function. Now that doesn't necessarily have to be payments. In the past it was basic payment scheme acts as a cushion against the marketplace, but it certainly are things like insurance products, whether against crop damage, weather damage or market uncertainty. So there needs to be measures around there, and we do need government to act to ensure that we can introduce those measures, even if it is the private sector that's delivering it. And then the other area is productivity. We want farmers to be able to stand on their own 2 feet and produce products that the market wants. They've got to improve their productivity. Now that productivity is not just about producing more, it's producing more efficiently. It's about producing more smartly. It's using GPS, it's investing in farm businesses. So there needs to be capital aids, research and development, advice, demonstration. What we need is a new green revolution, the same way as we had one in the past. Now, the previous agricultural transformation, as Adrian described very clearly, didn't do an awful lot of good to the countryside. It helped us feed ourselves, but perhaps not in the way we want to see in the future. In the future, we could use assistance in terms of productivity to be able to produce more smartly, to have a reduced greenhouse gas footprint, to do it in a way which actually enhances soil health rather than discourages it. And the really interesting areas from a policy point of view, and this is put up on purpose, are these intersections, measures that are in this area which deliver both productivity and environment, or volatility and productivity. This is the area which we really think the government can get involved in. And I suspect that actually this is the main sphere here, down here. This is where most of the money goes, but I certainly want government to be spending money here, and I've recognised that I'd like government to be spending money in this direction too. The public, the private businesses probably take activity here, and research community can play stuff here in kind, actually, activity. So there's plenty of space there, and that's our sort of model. We're putting our, we put our series of tests up to try and decide whether the government had actually delivered on its part of the deal in terms of developing new agricultural policy for England. But actually, it's probably far too early to actually see whether those tests are satisfied or not. The last slide, you're glad to know, is what the NFU is seeking. And I was conscious when I was sitting here listening to you this morning, I thought, actually, what I really should have put up is what society should get from this. So I'll say that in a moment. So this is for farmers, what do we want? We want a system that's fair to all active farmers. We don't want to see something that sets one farmer against another. The only way I'm going to be able to lead a union in a way which is actually going to deliver a sustainable and respected reform is for everybody to contribute to it. And that it is focused on people who are active farm businesses rather than, as we call them in Scotland, slipper farmers who just take in the money because they happen to own land. You actually have to farm and farm to a code of standards to get this. We want a system that actually provides sufficient time and certainty for those active farms to adapt and plan and take the opportunities to the future and to invest for the future. We want them to see a future and to be attracted to that and want to move towards that. We want the results to result in, this is for a farming audience, profitability is vital because profitability is their income. I also want them to be progressive, to think about the future rather than just worry about the present. And they've got to be sustainable. But then every sector has, and there's no choice between this, food production, environmental care and animal welfare. There are no choices. You're not either productive or environmental or welfare friendly. You've got to be all. Yeah. Professional farmers in the future, as they should be now, should meet all of those. And I do fight very strongly against that scenario that suggests that we're moving to a situation where we're either intensive or extensive or right off the field rewilding. Every farm, wherever they are, should have an element of food production and an element of environment. Now, in the fens, it might be 10-90 in favour of food production, and in the uplands, it might be the reverse. But there'll be a spectrum across our country of food and environmental provisioning. And then I also want to make sure that all government is involved in this choice and the whole of the food chain in the future of farming, rather than just parts of it. At the present moment, the consultation that we've got is very DEFRA-centric. And what we're arguing for very strongly is the whole of government should be concerned. We're worried about broadband provision. We're worried about the National Planning Policy Framework. We're worried about the industrial strategy. And getting involved in all of those. And then, so final point I was going to say is society needs a policy, I think, that delivers affordable, secure and sustainable food for all incomes. It's really important that we don't just aim for an artisan, high quality niche sector which is only interested in those in Islington and Highbury that can afford to buy that type of food. There'll be that, some of those will be doing that, but it's not most people are worried about the price of their food. And we did a survey which suggested 40% of the population actually buy the cheapest food available in the shop, not just the stuff that's produced in the UK. We want, secondly, a policy which actually reconnects, enthuses and creates a confident, a society that's confident in the job that farming does and the food that it delivers. If public and society are not confident in food, we know what happens. They don't buy it. We end up in a very bad place. So I think we've all got a shared interest in the future of farming. what it delivers, what it costs, what it does in the future. Now's the time for us to get involved and express our views. We have a hashtag, Speak Up for Farming. I think you need to have a hashtag which possibly adopts the same, but also Speak Up for Landscape. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very